The example that I give is a mother always baking this ham, cuts both ends of the ham. And then the daughter asks the mother, Mom, why do you cut the ham like that? And she's like, that's how my mother made the ham. And she's even created some theory in her mind about why the mother cut the ham like that. And so ask Grandma, why you make the ham like that? And Grandma says, I didn't have a big enough pan. And so all along, mother is thinking, I have to do it this way because this is the way to do it. And mother doesn't know that grandmother was doing it that way because there was no other space or capacity for it.
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper. EbonyJanice, welcome to My Rejection Story.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited for today's conversation. So my first question is, what is your earliest memory of rejection?
I don't know what my earliest memory, I'm sure I probably have memories before this one, but the first one that just came to my mind is I remember playing kickball with my cousins and one of our church friends, one of our guy friends from church. And everybody, so it was just me and one of my other girl cousins, but the rest, everybody else was boys. And everybody's getting picked, and then my older guy cousin was the captain for the other team. And I'm like, this is my favorite cousin. I know he's going to choose me. And then he chose my other girl cousin. And I like had this moment of like, is she better than me? And then also it's like a very early moment of like, but wait, why were we the last chosen? Because we're athletic too. Like, why did they choose us last? And there's just this, it's like, it's funny the things that you remember like as and that you receive as rejection, because the fact that I remember that and I have thought about it more than once over my lifetime, like, thank you CJ for choosing me since Travis didn't. So that is the earliest memory that I can think of right now.
You know that you're the second guest on the show for that, something very similar being the earliest memory, not being picked for a sports team.
How dare you? I believe it. It's like, I'm good at kickball. How dare you not choose me?
I think it might be also that the environment is just so prime for rejection. Like, you're just there, you're in public, it's humiliating, you're left behind, now everyone else has a team and you're just the one sitting there with no team. Like,
For sure. And
it is
and
mean.
it's like a lot of story connected to it too. Like if you really, because I've thought about it more than once in my lifetime. I'm 41 years old. Maybe that was like 30 plus years ago, right? But there were other things at play. I think that also added to the like, how could this happen to me moment? And so yeah, it seems silly, but also, there's stuff underneath it for it to have stuck for you.
Yeah. What stuff was there underneath it? Do you remember?
I had stuff with I didn't even think that I mean, it is called My Rejection Story, so here we are. My cousin, this particular girl cousin, is my age mate. She's 6 months younger than me. She's Emiko Janelle. I'm EbonyJanice, so we were raised like twin cousins. But she's extremely light skinned with curly hair, light eyes, and was absolutely treated different. As adults, we have a really close relationship, so it's not that we ever had beef. It's that adults treated us different. And so this was because I had such a close relationship with that particular cousin, I don't know that I had articulated at that age, but I thought they see her being treated better than me. There's no way he's gonna choose her before he chooses me, because I know they know that this is a thing for us. So when he chose her, it was just a moment of like, wait, is it not just the adults? Do other people feel this way about her over me too? So yeah, I've literally never talked about the colorism in my family publicly
Yeah.
before.
Colorism is an interesting topic. So do you, and with the hindsight of an adult, do you think that colorism was at play in your cousin choosing her, not you?
No, for him, I don't think so. I actually think I'm gonna call him when we get off this podcast, because I want to see if he remembers this at all. For him, I don't think so. I think it literally was just a choice. I don't. I think it was like a kid. Maybe I'm like 7 or 8 at the time, so he's probably like 12. I really just feel like it was like Emiko. I don't think it was a thing. Um, And for my cousins in general, I don't know that our generation participated as much in that kind of behavior as the generation before us, which is our parents, right? Um, so I can't say that it was that for him. I really do feel like it was
Mm.
like preteen. This is who's next. Come on, might as well come on, right? So yeah, I don't think it was
Yeah.
that.
And I suppose colorism is learned. I think perhaps your parents learned it from the society they've been in, whereas children are a little bit more sheltered from that. They haven't been as, would you say, like kind of as
For
conditioned by
sure. My
society.
grandmother's from Alabama, and I do want to say that my grandmother was very particular about making sure that I was well because of some of the things that happened and differences that was made between me and this particular cousin. And also, I want to acknowledge that it wasn't every adult in my family. There were particular ones who did behave this way.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, coming from the South and, just my grandmother's one generation away from her parents were sharecroppers. So we're literally in my lifetime, I know people who pick cotton, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that type of behavior and mentality, which comes directly as a result of anti-Blackness, which is, you know, uh, global white supremacy has impacted all of that. And so colorism, right, obviously is this the closer you are to whiteness and or the closer you are to having European features, because featureism is also a part of that, right? Her hair being curlier, her eyes being lighter, her features being less pronounced than mine are. So there is a way in which she was babied and coddled, and which is a thing that we've acknowledged as adults, like that absolutely happened, right? um one example that I can give of that is like we're age mates, but I was bathing myself way before she was with our
Mm.
with some of the people in our family. So it's like if she's a baby, I'm a baby. Why is and I have a very conscious memory of this, thinking back on it, like I could see like it's bath time, somebody going to wash her up, and me being sitting there with a wash rag and soap by myself. So there was like this, is there something more special about her? There was that kind of behavior. And again, for clarity, it wasn't everybody in my family, but there certainly were people who did participate in that behavior. For closure, though, I don't believe that my cousin in particular, I don't think this particular cousin was playing into it. I think that it was really just I'm preteen, you next. If
Yeah.
anything, sexism probably was at play, more than colorism. Like, I don't want a girl
Yeah.
on my team, period. But come on.
I think that's like any mixed race sports team. The girls are always last to get picked. I mean, mixed gender sports team. Um, just to kind of close off on the topic of colorism, it's I've lived around the world, and it's fascinating to me how it exists everywhere. I guess that's the
Hmm.
impact of colonization. But one of the memories that stays in my brain to this day, I can remember it so vividly, is when I was in first year at university. I did an ethics class, and we had to do these like weekly tutorials where we would gather with like 10 other students, and there'd be a facilitated discussion. And one week the discussion was colorism. And I
Hmm.
was the only white student there. So I was the only student who didn't have a history with
Personal. Hmm.
colorism. And by the end of that, like it was a 1 hour session, or maybe it was 90 minutes, I'm not too sure, almost everyone was in tears.
Hmm.
And I remember one woman saying she was experienced a lot of colorism within her own family, and she had a child with someone who was much lighter skinned. And I just remember her saying that the minute her child was born and she saw that the child had the skin tone of the father, she wept with gratitude, knowing that that child wouldn't go through what she went through. And that just like I don't know, it was, many years ago, but it still stays in my brain. So yeah, it's a complicated topic.
Very, very much so. Very much so. It's still definitely an issue. I think that, like I said, in my family, my age mates, my generation, we have done a lot better than those before us. And I certainly have deep empathy and grace for where it came from them. Um, and I think one thing that has been very profound for my generation is that we're the first generation to really access therapy, with ease. And so being able to talk about it with our elders and really kind of interrogate it for them, because keep in mind, there's not a whole bunch of, like, the adults before us, the ones that were participating in this, they weren't the fairest skinned people on the planet. So they were really just perpetuating their own internalized anti-Blackness. So yeah, it is a thing that either we feel relief that we don't have to continue it with our children, and our, my nieces and nephews are not experiencing it the same way as me. And also, we have the tools to really talk about it, and to, confront it in a very different way, I think, than our elders did.
Tools is a big one. And as you were talking about access to therapy, something that came to my mind is the idea of language, because I think a
Hmm.
very big difference between previous generations and our generation, and now especially younger generations, is that they can describe that this is colorism. And
Yeah.
I think there was a time where you couldn't even say that. It was just
Yeah,
like, you
something's
got,
happening. What is
like,
this difference? What is this thing that's happening? But yeah, I love that language. Having language for something is really, I feel like, as an educator, I I know I'm intelligent, but I don't even think it's that I'm that profound. I think sometimes the thing that makes my own teaching praxis seem profound, when that is happening, is that it's like a revelation of, like, I knew that that was a thing. I just didn't know what to call it. And because I didn't know what to call it, I didn't know how to call other people in to share this experience with me, and or to correct the behavior. So language is, like, absolutely a profound tool, for sure, for so many of us in our healing journeys.
yeah, yeah. And okay, I'm going to segue into something that I planned
Uh-huh.
for much later in the conversation, but we're kind of there already, so we can go back to some earlier questions. But you talk about language and you talk about healing generation, kind of using this to cross generations and almost educate the elders.
Mhm.
And that's a theme that I really enjoyed in your book, was the theme of generations and
Uh-huh.
carrying the weight of previous generations before you and thinking about future generations, your great grandchildren and great great grandchildren. So, yeah, I guess my question for you first is fear of rejection from family. I think that the fear of rejection from our family is something that guides most human beings, whether they know it or not. Many of
Mhm.
our decisions, who we are, what careers we pursue, what friendships we pursue, what relationships we pursue, are often guided by whether the family will accept this or not. So I loved your exploration of family and religion, and you write about wanting to explore your sexuality without the religious shame and guilt. That was kind of your one regret within your sexuality, and that you opened a conversation, which I loved, with your family
Uh-huh.
about how you should navigate your 30s as an unmarried woman. So my question, or I guess where I want to take the discussion, is talking about navigating a life and identity outside of familial norms or outside of what everyone else in the family has done. Were you afraid of being rejected or alienated from your family?
Yes. 100,000 trillion% yes. In fact, I may have mentioned this in the book, that one of my first consistent therapy experiences, my therapist said to me at some point, if I had a dime for every time you said, I don't want to bring shame to my family, I would be the richest woman in the world. And that's so real. It's like, I have fear of, multiple layers of fear, right? The example that you gave, me wanting, I don't even know if that was a desire. It definitely is a regret that I have.
Hmm.
I don't know if I even knew to desire this. Sin and shame was such a major part of my upbringing. Shame, uh, if you sin, shame was like sitting right there on the other side of it. So it was a powerful tool to keep you from sinning, and or to keep you from sinning out loud. So I definitely wasn't like, ooh, I want to, have more sex, or I want to have sex, or I want to have more sex. Like, every time I did have sex when I was younger, I immediately, like, I don't think that I experienced the full pleasure of the orgasm at the end of the experience, because immediately I was like, oh, I'm going to hell. And if my family finds out that I'm out here, whatever, I'm really going to hell. I'm going to hell in my family. They're going to reject me. They're going to shame me. They're going to, whatever. And so there's layers inside of that too. Like what's interesting about that is I don't know that I had personally experienced a lot of shame from my family. Like I don't know that my family, like every time I made a mistake, that my family had an active campaign to be like, wagging their finger in my face. I don't have an actual memory of that. But my upbringing was the language and the culture of my upbringing was such that I knew that if I did, behave in a way that was outside of whatever my family's true system was or whatever the enmeshed family value was, that I certainly there would likely be rejection on the other side of that. And so exploring my sensuality really is really a thing that I do look back on and regret, because I wish that I wouldn't have had so much sex with shame. And I'm saying so much, but really, in the big scheme of things, I've had so little sex as a 41-year-old woman. Like, I look back and I'm like, I should have had more sex. I was like missing. I had a relationship, a 3.5 year relationship, and we had so little sex in that relationship because the majority of it, both of us being from super Christian families, both of us were like, we're abstinent. Why are we doing this to ourselves? We should have been doing the booty. So it is a thing that I look back on and regret. It wasn't a thing that I thought of at the time though, right? Like I didn't think that I want to be having more sex. I thought, I want to be saved. I want to be pure. I want to be chaste. I want to be right. So, yeah, definitely 100,000 trillion percent believe that I would be rejected if I ever really became my actual self or thought about the things that I wanted to think about or explored the things that I, wanted to explore or, looking back on it, should have likely been exploring.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think this is extremely relatable for anyone who comes from a very religious background. I I love Esther Perel's podcast, Where Should We Begin, where she does like anonymous therapy sessions. And she had a session with a couple where they were married and they had been like, I think, teenage sweethearts and stuff. And they only started exploring sex in marriage
Uh-huh.
because in their like 7 years of being together, because they met each other in like high school or something, it was too much stigma and shame to have sex before. And at this point of them being here is that their sex life sucks
Uh-huh.
because and the way Esther kind of explores it with the woman is that her sexuality belonged to first her family and
Uh-huh.
the church, and now it belongs to the marriage, and it's never belonged to herself. And so I kind of am very interested in this idea of reconciling this because you think that it would all be fixed if you can fit the mold and enter the construct of marriage, but I don't think that that's the case for
Oh, for
many people,
sure.
at least. I think the shame and guilt can still feel there because it's so deeply embedded in you that you shouldn't feel pleasure as a woman. So yeah, so what has kind of your journey been like now, I guess, with reconciling that and navigating your relationship with your family?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I never heard that podcast, and I absolutely have that same language for myself. That I was, I think, maybe turning 31. This was right after Beyonce's Drunken Love came out, so maybe like a month after Drunken Love came out, and I'm undressing. It's the night of my birthday, so I was either turning 31 or 32. The night of my birthday, I'm undressing, and it's dark in the room, but the moonlight is shining through. This is such a dramatic retelling, and so I can see my reflection in the mirror, and I get to the part where she's like, "No complaints with my body, so fluorescent under these lights," and I'm naked by this point, and I just have this like moment of like, wait, I I think that I do have complaints with my body, but then I look at my body and I'm like, it's kind of a good body. Why am I complaining about this body? And then I'm like, are those my complaints, or is that my family's, or is that the church? And that's the revelation, is like my body to the age of 32, 30, like 31, 32, right? Never belonged to me. It belonged to past partners. It belonged to the church. It belonged to my family. It belonged to God. It was never, ever EbonyJanice's body. Ever, ever, ever. And so that is a major part of my reconciliation of like, I could think different things. I can experience different things. I can have, like, right, like we're saying, have different experiences than my family, because my family has their own ideas about what a body should do, but that's for their body. What my body should do could be something drastically different. I want to give myself space to consider it for the first time. 31, 32 is really young in the big scheme of things. But 30 plus years of like, this ain't even your own body. The thing that you has been housing you, housing your spirit, housing your soul, you've been walking around it. You know it more intimately than anybody else on the planet, and it's not yours. And so that is in my journey towards really I describe it in the book as coming out. My theological shift, that's a major part. I'm in the season of having a theological shift at that time as well. And I grew up super Christian. I've been preaching from the pulpit since I was 8 years old. And so that's another part of the shame, like this shame of like, my family is going to reject me if I say that I don't know if Jesus is a thing for me in the way that Jesus is supposed to. I'm doing quote fingers, right? Supposed to be a thing for me. And if Jesus is not a thing for me in the way that Jesus is, again, quote fingers, supposed to be for me, then a lot of the story that I have about sin in my body is not even relevant, because that is maybe no longer even my true system. So now I'm holding myself in bondage for a true system that isn't even mine. Like I'm living on my mother's shame. So whatever my mom is ashamed of or considers sin or wrong, that's mine too. And so I did, over the next several years, both evolve in my theological truth system, which of course impacted how I see myself in the world. Because God is such a big deal, and what you think about God, right? Like religion is such a big deal, and what you think about God, what you think about religion, what you think about spirit is literally holding you in place in this earth and in your families and your relationships, et cetera, et cetera. And at which point I really gave myself permission to evolve and to become. I did actually, was rejected by several family members, and have drastically different relationships with some people that I was really, really close to. And some of those relationships have really evolved over the years to and healed to, repair some of what was lost in that particular season. And some, I don't think that they'll ever recover. I think that, like, this is just what we are. We text and say, I might get a text from a particular aunt. Hey, baby, I miss you. Okay, I miss you too, Auntie. And that's the most that we're gonna do for the next, 3 to 4 months. Even though that's not what that relationship used to be, but it's the most we can do, because our true systems are so drastically opposing that and for one of us, I won't point the finger, but for one of us, that true system matters so much that if everybody around them doesn't agree with it, then they must not be well. So it's not possible to have healthy relationships in that way, which means that we have to grow, we have to evolve, and we have to surrender sometimes. It's like a dagger to the heart when it first happens, but sometimes we even have to surrender family members or close friends that we feel like this is a lifetime relationship. It might not
Yeah.
be a lifetime relationship.
There's so many things you said so beautifully there, but one thing that I wrote down and highlighted was when you term this as coming out with religion and coming out your sexuality. And in many ways, I can see why that is a fitting term, because I think that coming out is terrifying in any sense because you don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But an interesting thing that I've observed with friends and people close to me is that once you're out and you've found acceptance within other communities, it's very hard to go back into that closet amongst,
Ever.
yeah, your
Ever.
chosen family. That's when you find yourself avoiding them if you know that
Ever.
they will never accept you. So I'm really curious, how did you reach that point where you were ready to feel that dagger through your heart, like feel that pain of potential rejection, because you knew that that was a very real risk? What was that like? What did it take to get there?
I think one of the greatest griefs, I want to say the greatest grief, but I'm saying this off the top of my head, so I possibly could think of something more violent than this. But I think one of the greatest griefs that humanity is experiencing is not being your actual self. Living in this, there's a pain associated with not being you. It is actually both physically and spiritually painful to hide, to clench down, right? To stifle something, to not to speak in a voice that is not your own voice, to be forced to not get to look like yourself, walk like yourself, talk like yourself. And I have, in some ways, maybe always had a little feeling that I was different from the accepted norm around me. And um, And I know that my family knew that as well, because we have these moments now where we'll have a memory of something from my childhood and somebody will be like, see, it was always sitting right there in our face, right? Like that I was never going to stay in whatever that track was, whatever that path was. I was, as a little girl, going to come out. One example that I give is my aunt, my oldest aunt is the director, or growing up, like the director of pretty much every choir in our city, in our small town. And I remember I was maybe like 13 years old, and there I wanted to rap on this song. Mind you, when I say choir, I'm talking about gospel choirs. So I wanted to rap on this song, and I was like, "Hey, Pepe, I gotta rap." And she's like, "Okay, baby, that's nice." And so she's like, "No, that's not for the concert. We're not gonna do that." My aunt closes her eyes during this song at some point, and I step to the mic and I start rapping. And it goes well, whatever, whatever. After the concert is over, she's just cracking up laughing. She's like, "Something told me, don't close your eyes. You can't trust this girl." And so it's a thing that we joke about now, that I'm an adult and, our relationship. She's like, every now and then I just look over at a picture of you and I just think, remember the time you closed your eyes for 1 second and this girl decided she was just going to do what she wanted to do? It was always right there. It was always right there, for a lot of experiences from my childhood. It was always right there that I was probably not going to stay quiet, or that I was probably not going to, just do whatever I was told to do forever, even though that felt like so there was something, and I even used that example to say I felt compelled. There was something that was compelling me to take that mic, or to say this thing, or to speak up, or to not just accept whatever was given, even though it felt very scary to do it. And so all those words to say, that is really what helped me to get to the point of being like, ooh, I'm not going to be able to not say this. When I say I came out as not Christian to my family, or that my theology has shifted, and that there were other ideas that I had that wasn't a part of my family enmeshed values. So many of my queer friends have said, no, the way you describe this grief, this fear, what you were going through sounds exactly what it felt like for me to say to my family, I am not whatever you think I'm supposed to be. That is not what this is. And because religion is such a big deal, particularly for my family, keep in mind, I've been preaching from the pulpit since I was 8. My family has an idea of who it is that I'm supposed to be, what I'm going to do, what I've been called to do, right? It is a huge deal for me to say, not only am I shifting in my true system around Jesus Christ, don't even call me a Christian, and I am now going to initiate to an African spiritual tradition, which we have historically been taught is demonic. So it's like I didn't just shift and like now I'm a Jehovah's Witness. I am an initiated Ifa priest. It was clearly a deal, a big deal in my family when that happened. And but I felt compelled, the same way that I felt compelled as a young girl sometimes to speak out, to say things, to be a little weird, to, maybe be a little rebellious. In fact, that is what it felt like. It felt like this. If I stay here, if I don't say this, if I keep being inauthentic with my family, I won't ever know peace. And it was painful. And there are still moments where it is painful, but I would never, there's no way that I would undo becoming actual EbonyJanice. I would never, there's nothing that I would do to go back to, the whisper that I was.
Yeah, the whisper that you were. That's so beautifully put. I love that how you describe the greatest grief as not being yourself. And I think when I sit here and talk to people like you who are themselves and know, the power of being able to tap into all the gifts and strengths of being your true self, it's a no-brainer why it would be the greatest grief.
Uh-huh.
But it's very fascinating to me is what differentiates the people who have, like, you were outspoken from a young age, you were not a rule follower, you couldn't just conform
Uh-huh.
from a young age and just do it by the books like the good girls were doing, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious in what differentiates someone like you to someone who carries on following the rules well into their later life and then lives with a lot of regret for not pursuing the things that they wish they could pursue. And I know that's a theme in your book is, what would you pursue
Mm-hmm.
if you had the opportunity? And yeah, I am curious about kind of what makes someone a rule breaker versus a rule follower.
That is such a good question. And I have a couple answers and I'm trying to decide what is the answer for this moment. Um, I want to tell you something that I believe. Um, I don't particularly use the language of reincarnation, but I definitely believe that my spirit and soul are not 41 years old. That I believe in the eternal. And even for people who aren't necessarily religious, you think of the language of like deja vu, for example. Like we have these, which translates to already seen, and and the when I was growing up and I came to the language of deja vu because I was having these experiences of like I know this and there's no way that I should know this, as a little girl. I wrote a book when I was like 10 years old called Sazia, which means these eyes. It's
Wow.
so dramatic, honestly, to really think about it. But the main character is a young preteen girl who has a gift of sight. She could just see things, like she just sees into the future. And this is before that's so Raven, for the record. So there's that. But I have this thought about this as this character is kind of loosely based on my life because there are these moments in my life that feel like, even as a young girl, like I know this already, or I've seen this already, or I've experienced this already. And so I'm putting this together just as a part of my own lived philosophy, my own truth system, that because I believe that the soul is eternal, there are glimpses of all of our life. I think that's always there. And for some of us, we are just, maybe there's a hope. I want to talk about mentors and people who speak into your life. So that could be the thing that distinguishes you from other people, because I don't think that that's unique to me. I believe that we all have those moments of like, I know this. I know this about myself. I know this about this experience. I know this about this moment. But life and insecurity and rules are so compiled on top of that you just throw it away and you just say that's not true, that's not a thing, or that's just my mind, or that's just my imagination, that wasn't real. But for me, I gave the example of grabbing the mic when my aunt's eyes were closed during that concert. I have a memory of being maybe around the same age, and I grew up in the Baptist church, which the I'm making that distinction because for it wasn't until maybe the late 90s when women were allowed to preach from the pulpit in the Baptist church. But I grew up in the Baptist church in a Southern Black experience where my pastor, for some reason, used to let me cut up so bad at that church. A young girl. There is a time where I remember around the same age that we're having praise and worship and we're trying to transition into the next part of the service, which will be offering, and then after offering will be the sermon. And I felt compelled to go take the mic and say, I believe this is what God is saying for us in this moment. And I'm standing behind the pulpit, which when I say women weren't allowed to preach, I mean you were not supposed to. Women were not allowed to even walk through this part of the podium. You could not walk behind that bookboard, is what it was called. And here I am, 10, 11-year-old EbonyJanice with the microphone, Nobody has given me permission to do this. I come down out the choir stand and take this microphone. And so when I think about that, when I think about not only was I conscious of these glimpses of myself as a young girl, which I believe we all have, I also had people who gave me space for that kind of play, for that kind of interrogation, right? Even as a, I use my aunt as the example where she laughed about it after the concert, even though she had told me not to do it, she laughed about it afterwards. Maybe if after that concert she would have chastised me and said, "That's wrong, you gonna get a whooping or whatever," maybe that would have been messaging to me that says, "Don't try this again." But I didn't get that messaging. I got like, "Oh, I didn't think this at the time, but clearly there was something in the permissive nature of the moment that said, try this again in the future. Speak up for yourself again in the future." And so, and there are, again, I said, mentors and elders and people who speak into those moments. I think everybody doesn't have those same experiences, but I do believe if I could offer any kind of affirmation or encouragement, is that because I had also believed in those glimpses for myself, in those moments for myself, and I believed in the mysticism of it, I believed in the deepness of it. um I don't want to minimize how much other people supported that in those little moments to make it possible for me to dig into those and interrogate those moments even more. But I did believed in them. I did. I thought like, oh, God is calling me to say this. I'm going to 11-year-old EbonyJanice is going to take this mic in this super traditional Baptist church that I've never seen anybody do this before, but I'm going to do this. Clearly, no one gave me permission to do that. I believed that God was speaking to me enough for me to go and say that and have that moment. And I still believe in it. I still believe in it. And I just tend to now, as this version of myself, jump a lot quicker into those, memories and into those to those whispers and to those visions than I did when I was a little girl.
Did you know that my company, Hustling Writers, books entrepreneurs and authors on podcasts? We've been doing this for the last 5 years, and we've booked our clients on hundreds of top 1% and top 0.5% podcasts, which has, as a result, led to their books being instant bestsellers and even selling out on Amazon on the day of release. If this is of interest to you and the idea of being interviewed by a name like Adam Grant or Mariana Hewitt sounds really exciting, let me know. Email media@hustlingwriters.com and I'll be in touch to book a discovery call. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What I kind of am hearing is that mentors or elders or people in your community who give you some kind of glimpse that you'll be okay, or perhaps even share an example of themselves doing it, helps. I'm a very firm believer in the idea of you have to see it to be it. And I mean, that's also partly like sharing this podcast. Part of the mission is that, you want people to see that successful people we look up to have been through some shit. And you can do that too. And so I think you kind of beautifully talk about the role that people in the community can play, and perhaps that is. I mean, I never thought of it that way, but perhaps that is a big role. So, in your book, All the Black Girls Are Activists, we're going to segue. I know we've sort of touched on it. I really enjoyed listening because I listened on Audible. But you ask a powerful question, which is, who would Black women get to be if we did not have to create from a place of resistance? And I love that. Your book deals with the theme of softness a lot, which I think is also relates to what we were just talking about with sexuality. But I'm curious, this question you asked, do you have that vision for your personal life right now? And what does that vision look like?
Oh, yeah. It's actually really simple. I want to live a life in which I get to be miscellaneously laying on my couch in the morning and think to myself, what do I want to get into today? It is the wonder of childhood. It's really the return to that. It's like I want that for all people in general. but my focus, my work is focused on Black women and femmes. And so I'm very interested in what it would look like for a collective group of Black women to be able to like have that kind of ease, to explore it, to pursue it, to demand it, and to literally on a daily basis wake up, go do whatever your morning rituals are, and sit down on the couch and literally just think to yourself, what do I want to get into today? What do I want to do today? And that is my vision for myself. That is part of the way that I stay in the pursuit of that question is I start my morning with my, I have a time. I do not talk in the morning before 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time because I need time to be nice to me before I could be nice to you. And so I do all my little morning things. I wake up super early too, so I get a lot done in that time frame before I start talking to people. I'm not getting away with it recently because I have to pick up my nephews and take them to school in the morning. But when they get in the car, I just be looking at them like, "Why are you talking? We haven't even prayed yet," But yeah, that is the vision that I have for myself and for others, and particularly for Black women and femmes.
Yeah, yeah, I love that so much. And glad that you can kind of live it, even though your nephews are interrupting it a little
It
bit.
needs to come to an end quickly.
Um, so one of the really astute observations in your book when you talk about the pursuit of softness is that the first adjective we often think when we think of Black women is strong and almost never soft. And I think that we see this in the media too. So it's very rare to see Black and brown characters on TV who are living quote unquote soft lives,
Hmm.
or concerned with what is seen as frivolous stuff like dating, whereas you see that all the time with white characters in the media. So yeah, I'm curious to know, like, on the topic of rejection, if I guess what your thoughts are in the way that society might actively be rejecting Black women's ability to show up with vulnerability and softness.
Oh, yeah. So here's the thing. When I talk about softness, I'm actually not there's two kind of understandings of softness. There is this kind of viral moment happening for Black women in luxury. And so it's like you see them
Mm.
on vacations with the robes on and, just being treated very well, taken care of, having luxury items. And I want to let you know that I love that for every single one of them. So when they talk about soft girl life and they're talking about, I don't do anything, I get my nails done, I love that for you. I want that for you. But that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about softness. When I talk about softness, I'm talking about a regulating nervous system. I'm talking about not having to be like fully in my body in this resistance, space where I really could just be fully seated in myself. And from that place, I get to create, I get to dream, I get to imagine. Even from that place, I get to have really hard conversations. And I use Toni Morrison in this particular chapter as the example to say softness is not about just being able to just lay on the couch, which even though lay on the couch. Softness is really so I'm talking about softness like soft like cotton. Cotton is durable. It is strong still. It is long lasting. Toni Morrison could sit in an interview and have someone talking to her about racism and being really kind of violent in that conversation. And Toni Morrison would be leaned back in her seat, not even sit up, right? Because sometimes when you're having hard conversations, you have to sit up in your body. She'd be leaned back and she would just, with this soft voice, say something like, "You can't even imagine how incredibly racist what you just said is right now." And never raise her voice, and never, not that a raised voice is wrong, because sometimes madness, right, which is a chapter I talk about as well, like we have a right to be mad. But I'm saying when I have to get up out of my seat, when I have to scream, when I have to shout, when I have to punch, when I have to kick, that doesn't just impact you. Even if I won the fight, it impacts me, it impacts my body, it impacts me over time. And we have seen the studies. There's a recent study that just came out that showed that Black women are suffering at a larger rate than any other group of people from autoimmune diseases. Why? They're linking it to Black women feeling like they have to bite their tongues in the workplace, Black women feeling like they have to combat this idea of angry Black woman, Black women feeling like they have to combat all these stereotypes. And so what if Black women had the actual space to do the work of consistently having a regulating nervous system, being able to operate from that place.
I mean, the idea of being dysregulated, and I believe those studies that you highlighted, I think that having people be dysregulated is one of the best ways to keep them oppressed. And I think that you see it in all kinds of oppression and marginalization, is get people distracted with other things, have them be as
Yes,
unregulated as possible. Because if you, in your definition of soft, which is if you're regulated, you can think clearly and you can plan and
absolutely.
strategize and work with people and basically not allow these systems of injustice to continue in the way that they are.
Absolutely. I know where I was going with that too. What I wanted to say, because you asked me about rejection in particular, is I gave those two understandings of softness, particularly from this Black girl experience, and both ends of those spectrums are widely criticized. Black women experiencing luxury, it's a when you call someone bougie, it is usually bougie as a like this colloquial language is usually directed to Black women. People do not be calling white girls bougie when they have nice things or have a certain standard. So when you see a group of Black women start saying, this is the kind of lifestyle that I expect, and there is like a backlash about it, like that's not realistic, that's not accessible, that's not, we don't have the same conversations for other groups of people who just with ease live in that into that reality. It's the same thing with talking about a regulating nervous system. Trisha Hersey Patrick from the Nap Ministry talking about rest gets so much resistance with people saying, rest, we got work to do. And also, we deserve to rest. When you hear Sheila Marie from Curvy Curly Conscious talking about Black girls playing, there ain't nothing to play about. Wait, we deserve to be able to play and to be jovial in this way. When you hear Lauren Ash of Black Girl in Om talking about just the very necessary work of just giving Black women space to breathe, breathing, we got an agenda. Why can't we just breathe? So there is certainly rejection and resistance on both ends of it. And I think that rejection and resistance certainly speaks to the fact that we're on the cusp of a breakthrough in this reality, right? Nobody, immediately, shows up to change in the way that we receive things. And even just me saying this out loud, like, oh, I want all the Black girls to be soft. Even some of the Black girls don't know that softness is something that they should have access to because we have been so deeply socialized around the idea of being strong, being independent, having it all together that we don't have the language, which we were talking about earlier. We don't have the language for. There might be something else, and what would it look like for us to explore the balance of both?
Yeah, yeah. Language, and something that I would just want to chat about quickly, because as you were talking about that pursuit of softness and many girls or women not knowing that this is something that they could or should pursue, it made me think of a metaphor you use in your book, which is you talk about a mother cutting the sides of a ham before she cooks it. And in this metaphor, maybe you should be the one explaining it because I might get it wrong. But what you can explain it, but what I just want to ask about is what I thought about when I heard that metaphor, which I thought was really powerful, is how our parents can think that they're passing on the right things. They're teaching you the right things. And growing up in post-apartheid South Africa, which is where I grew up, many of my Black female friends, their parents pushed them into certain careers, and said, by all accounts, this is what you have to do. And you don't have the luxury of being regulated. You don't have the luxury of choosing what you want to do. And I look at it now and I look at it that they were operating from very different data sets to what these girls have, because they have more options and there's more available than there was. And it's not that the parents had bad intentions. It's just that they didn't have the data set and the knowledge of what actually was available to their
Yeah,
daughters.
it's literally.
So maybe you can explain that
Yeah,
metaphor.
it's literally. I thought this was the truth. I really did think this was the truth. What I was telling you. So the example that I give is a mother always baking this ham cuts both ends of the ham. And then the daughter asked the mother, Mom, why do you cut the ham like that? And she's like, that's how my mother made the ham. And she's even created some theory in her mind about why the mother cut the ham like that. And so ask Grandma, why you make the ham like that? And Grandma says, I didn't have a big enough pan. And so all along, mother is thinking, I have to do it this way because this is the way to do it. And mother doesn't know that grandmother was doing it that way because there was no other space or capacity for it. Only making the ham that way because that's the only capacity that she had. And so, what other places in our life have our parents passed on their understanding as the gospel, as a fact, without, again, you're connecting this to language again, right? When we talk about language, really sometimes we're talking about the privilege of thinking about something in a different way, really thinking it through, right? And it's like if my mother ever really sat down and thought about why the ham is being made this way, and or even thought, I'm going to ask my mother why she made the ham this way, you know, she would have passed on a very different way to make the ham. And it also makes me think about, you know, that example, how much was wasted, how much was lost because she was making the ham that way, not realizing that she had a large enough pan and her mother didn't. There's so many examples in my life when it comes to sensuality, sexuality. There are absolutely, I feel like my grandmother had 6 girls, so I have 6 aunts. We're like, you know, like 7 mothers basically growing up. And of the 7 of them, I feel like my mother is the biggest prude. Honestly, like you cannot talk to this lady about kissing. I'm 41 and I said something recently to my mom. I just was being over the top and my mom was just like, absolutely leave my house. Like, absolutely enough. Too much. And, you know, that to say, if my mother also has some stuff, you know, from her own childhood, which is, you know, her own story to tell, that impacted what she thinks about sensuality, which of course created the language for her to speak into her own child, where she thinks she's protecting me, keeping me safe from men, from violence, from social stigma. She doesn't realize that she has her own stuff to heal, but she never has the language for that. She never has like anybody giving her those tools. So it's just a continual perpetuation of like, you know, this is bondage, you don't know it is though, because again, the mother is making the ham like that because she thinks this is how you're supposed to make the ham. She has no capacity whatsoever to explore there may be other ways to make this ham.
Yeah, yeah. I love that metaphor so much, and also just having you explain it so beautifully. And something which you touch on in the book is thinking of future generations.
Hmm.
And I wonder, like, you know, with the metaphor of the ham, that you can teach your own
Oh
kids or
yeah.
other generations how to make the ham in a different way. And so while you may not be able to change the way your mother views things or even force her to have the language to explain, you can teach different things and share new ways of approaching things through with future generations. Is that something that you, yeah, like think about and
Yeah,
as
I actually am on a mission. I don't have children out of my body yet, but clearly I got some kids. And
the early
my
school runs?
mission, you know, with these people is that they don't just think about it 2 ways, that they think that there is an infinite amount of ways that they could make the ham, you
Mm.
know, which is not at all what we were taught growing up. We taught that there was straight is the way, narrow the gate. There's only one path. And I don't even know what is all possible. Even with me dreaming and imagination being such an important part of my work, of my life, of my existence, of my spirituality, I am I am almost clueless to how many ways you could make this doggone ham, you know? And I'm thinking of several. Like I think that I've done something profound by being like, oh, I can think of 5 ways off the top of my head to make the ham. I want my nephews to be like, ATM, that's small. I can think of 100 ways to make the ham. And also, maybe we shouldn't eat the ham at all. Right? Like I want them to just have an infinite. And so I actually was thinking about this morning because I had some beautiful news. And it's connected to my education. And I was thinking about, I talk about this a little bit in the book, but it really just hit me this morning. My great grandmother was a sharecropper, Minnie Bell Lee. My grandmother's mother, Emma Jane Baxley, her mother, Minnie Bell Lee, was a sharecropper. She has several children. My grandmother wasn't the oldest or the youngest, but she's the only one of her siblings who never had to pick cotton. Some arbitrary defining of Emma Jane is too smart. She has to go to school. She can't pick cotton, right? So, as of my family's family tree, at which point it splits off to my grandmother. My grandmother's lineage, all of us went to school. My grandmother went to school. She's the only one of her siblings that went to school. All of her children went to school. It just became this very basic expectation. I don't even think we throw confetti about it. It's like, of course you will graduate from high school. That's a very basic thing. And so my great grandmother said to Emma Jane Baxley, Emma Jane cannot pick cotton. She has to go to school. Emma Jane had my mother, Cassandra, who is a very basic standard for her for education, so that EbonyJanice could eventually be born, go to school, continue her education, build schools, create curriculum, do this work. And so I was thinking about this news that I received this morning, and I was thinking about how I've always framed the story that way, that Minnie Bell Lee was thinking about EbonyJanice. And it hit me that my family lineage has yet to see how amazing the moment that Minnie Bell Lee said Emma Jane can't pick cotton, she has to go to school, right? It could be my great granddaughter that's like the president of education of the World Council of, it's like we don't even know what that moment really did. And so again, the infinite possibilities that I want for my nephews and for any potential children to come from my body in the future, what I want for them is to just literally blow my mind, for me to be like, I never could have thought that with my brain, that was possible. And I was out here thinking about a lot of things with my brain. So wow, right? But yeah, it's the not assuming that there is a way, or maybe even many ways, that there are an infinite amount of ways that we could arrive at a very beautiful existence. And so the limitation of cooking the ham one way, has certainly come to an end, I believe, as far as my bloodline is concerned.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I just was so beautiful is when you talk about that there are an infinite number of ways, because I think that this is a very subjective personal opinion, but I think that when parents try to limit their children into thinking that there is one way, that is where I think it can be very hard for the children to break out and see that there are other ways available to
Hmm.
them. And so, one of the greatest gifts I think parents can give is to say, I'm not the authority. I can show you the ways I know,
Uh-huh.
and it's up to you to figure out the ways that work best for you. So, that was just really beautifully put. I
Before
want
you
to.
move on, you actually asked me a question earlier about why, you know, me having this moment as compared to maybe other people who don't, um, like jump out the window or, make some different choices. And I talked about mentoring, but I also want to say that there are also moments in my life, and I hope that we will do this to other people, and particularly to young people. There also are moments in my life where what was happening was I was the revelation that there were other ways to do it. And there were some adults around me that were like, "Oh," and made space for that exploration. So, you know, they thought this is the exact way to do it. Um, and at which point I arrived on the scene, it was like, wait a minute, what's happening? I didn't even know that. A very quick example that I can give is actually, I was having a conversation with my aunt, who is maybe at the time like 62. So 30 plus years older than me. And I said something to her about this experience that I had with my grandmother when I was a little girl. And I was thinking that she was going to like feel some kind of way about it because I'm talking about her mother. And I was like, Grandma was wrong. And here's da 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 whatever. And my aunt said, like, she got teary eyed and she was like, I never thought of that ever. And I know that I've done that with my own girls. I've never thought of that. And so it's just this moment of like my aunt, who is a good, honorable woman, thinking that she's raising her children to be free women, has this revelation for herself that, like, oh, there was nothing liberative about that. I have been doing that with my own girls for years. I will never do that again. So there's this intergenerational womanist exchange that gets to happen, because it's not just that I'm learning from the elders and from my ancestors. Certainly I am. But my elders and ancestors also are learning from me, because I'm a revelation. I'm not saying that to make myself more profound. My sister is a revelation. My cousins are revelations, right? Like, we're all a revelation. But there are moments where other people, especially our elders and, the people who have some authority, a quote unquote authority in our lives, also get to look at us and be like, I didn't know. I
Yeah.
never would have thought it. That is a revelation to me. Thank you for that information.
You said this so beautifully, and I completely agree with you. I think that as children, we're raised to think that our elders have all the answers, and growing up, part of growing up is realizing that they don't, and that they can learn from you. And I know, like, I always questioned myself if my mother ever judged a decision I made, and
Uh-huh.
it was very it shifted the way I viewed things when I realized that I had actually influenced her decision later. So, for example,
Uh-huh.
she was very worried about me not getting a job, as any parent would be. And then it's kind of realizing a few years down the line that I've shifted the way she views work and the types of things that she's looking at pursuing. And just various conversations where I've realized she's actually learned through the decisions that I've made that things could look different to what she had imagined, I guess, for herself.
It's a revelation when we see that I might have raised my mother well. I might have done a good job raising this lady. It's such a revelation for sure.
That's so beautiful. To wrap up the conversation, I'm very curious to hear a little bit about your professional life. So I know you have I don't even know what titles I should use for you
I
because
don't
there's
know
so
either.
many, but you are an author, you're an activist, you're a speaker, you're an educator. Um, you have a big following on social media. You have lots of books under your name. Did you face any major rejections or hurdles in your career, professional journey, and getting to where you are now?
Yes.
Of course,
In all of
everyone.
the above areas, in every single area, for sure. My first books, my book that came out last year, All the Black Girls Are Activists, is my first traditional published book. But my very first book is actually, I've never shown this publicly. It's actually this little, wait a minute, the cover isn't even on that one anymore. Here it is. I printed this on a
I love it.
printer. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?
You were a
It's a book,
visionary. You knew.
and I bound it with a glue gun. I was serious about this book. I was like 19 years old. It's a book of
Amazing.
poems called Young Black Girl.
I love
I
it.
I don't it tickles me actually when I think about that book. But what happened was I wanted to publish a book. I was so young. I didn't know what you needed to do to publish a book. I did the minimal research available for me at the time, because Google was not Google at that time, and learned that I would need to get an agent, and also from the information available at the time that poetry books weren't necessarily flying off the shelf unless you were an acclaimed, well-known poet. And that was not helpful to me. I was not getting hits from, agents, and nobody knew me at the time at all. And my little poems were cute, but nobody was trying to publish these books. And so it's interesting to, my rejection story, that I really didn't see that moment as rejection, even though I think the definition of rejection, like, girl, nobody's publishing this book. I think that we could definitely see that as rejection, but I didn't receive it as rejection. I really received it as a moment to really make a decision for myself. Is Does what they have to say about this book matter to me more than what I have to say about it? And my parents, who, I've talked about, like, my upbringing, like, these people are gonna reject me. But I do want to say that my parents, as much as I have to talk about them every single week in therapy. They really did play such a major part in helping me to become this version of myself, because when I became very passionate about anything growing up, they would tell me what they could do, what they couldn't do, and then I would go from there. And this was a particular moment of being like, I am going to publish this book by myself. I'm going to start my own publishing company. I wish that your
Love
viewers could see
it.
my little, this is
Very
my logo.
blurry. I
Belle
love it.
Noir Productions. This is just so cute to me. And so, start my own publishing company with one author, me, and my parents bought me a printer. And this is huge because this is when printers like cost a mortgage. Like
Yeah,
printers were
yeah.
not $100 at the local Walmart. You had to pay a couple $100s for a printer. My parents bought me this printer. I bought a glue gun. I wrote my book. I printed it out. I printed all these copies out. I was selling them on MySpace. And so it was, like I said, it was a moment for me to make a decision. I didn't receive it in the way of course, there was some disappointment, but it was like an instant moment of like innovation for me. Okay, I will do it this way then. The very beautiful thing about this story is that I was selling this book on MySpace. It wasn't selling. Like I was like, making money selling this book on. I'm sure I lost money with this book. But this girl, stranger, her name is Tara Mixon, reached out to me on MySpace and was like, I want to buy this book. She buys the book and she messages me like a month or so later and she's like, I would like to help you really self-publish it and turn it into a real book. And Tara Mixon, at the time it was Lulu. I don't know if people who have written or published books, self-published books, remember Lulu, but Lulu.com, it might still be a thing. I don't know. Lulu, she took my book, uploaded it. I sent her the file. She did this for free. She was just like, I just want to help you get this book published. Upload the file, and I had a real book, and it was just like the biggest deal in the world to me. And that was the beginning of my own self-publishing journey. I then self-published like 4 other books after that, and just continued to grow in my craft as a writer, and then eventually I didn't even have an agent when I got my book deal with Row House. Actually, it
Wow.
was a DM exchange with the founder. I was talking about something else, and she said, "Thank you for starting this conversation because I meant to reach out to you, ask you, do you want to publish a book?" And I said, "I got a book. I'm ready." And so we got on a phone call maybe like 3 days later, her and the vice president, she's the vice president at the time, Krista McGinnis, and we're on the conversation. I do not have a real proposal. I know the book that I want to write, but I don't have a full like outline, like what a proposal is supposed to be. We have a conversation. I tell them this idea of this book, and on the phone call, Rebecca is like, "I want it." So think about my first rejection of not being able to get an agent. I am a published author of a best-selling book, and I still don't have an agent right now. So that's my story. I'm not saying that that is the way that it would necessarily work for everybody, but in my rejection story, and I'm doing quote fingers because again, don't necessarily call it that, but that's definitely what that moment was. In my rejection story, I've always um, seen those moments or seen that particular moment as a moment to be innovative, to grow, to evolve, to become. And then at the set appoint time, when it's just the right time for me. And it was such the right time for me that I didn't even have to do what you traditionally are supposed to do to get the book deal. I had established myself as an authority on this topic, and it was just an easy yes from the publisher. My next
Yeah.
book, it doesn't have a real proposal. It was I emailed her and was like, my attention span at this point. If I really write this proposal, it won't happen. So let's talk about this book. We got on the phone, we got on Zoom, we talked about the book. I sent her my notes, the ramblings that I had, and she was like, I want that book immediately. So it's a still no agent in sight. Eventually I'll get an agent, but for now I just haven't needed one.
This is amazing. So you are the first person I've spoken to who is a MySpace author, back in the era of MySpace.
Back in the day.
And also, I think so many authors or people who want to become authors are so defined by what the publishing industry is saying. And even though you have a book deal and you have a successful book, you were not interested in letting the establishments reject you or define you, and you got those books out there before there was a book deal for the earlier books.
I
So
had
I just
something
think,
to say. That's really what it was. And that is the advice that I actually give to people who want to write books. If self-publishing is an option for you, and it's so close to free at this point, you could do print on demand. If you want to self-publish, you could go through, I think it's Kindle Unlimited now, whatever it is. It's so close to free. They don't deserve my advertisement, honestly. I just gave that free advertisement. But it's so close to free that if you have something that you must say, and I know that I have at least 30 more books in me before this life comes to an end. So I'm never worried about this is the one. I think this is important. And I think very similar to Nikki Giovanni, which is a very arrogant thing to say, but Nikki Giovanni has books that she self-published in her, earlier years as a known poet and author, that years later they're now being reprinted and republished by traditional publishers. And that is my own expectation for myself, that at some point now, the world will never see Young Black Girl. It's actually really awful.
is this the poetry?
It's actually really awful. I at my book, I'm done because I will talk all day long. But at my book release party, after party, some of my closest friends were there, and somebody brought this book up and had the book with them. So they're like, "Dude, read." And I'm just like so embarrassed. And I open up and I start reading one of the poems, and I'm like, I immediately stop and I'm like, never will I ever publicly read this ever again. So this book will never exist. If you got it as a collector's edition, and I would like to threaten your life to never share it with anybody. But the
Now
point
everyone
is,
wants a copy. But I mean,
no,
that's
never. It's so bad. But I was 19, so I could get away with it. But the point that I'm making, though, is I believe that any book that I put out before the masses, quote unquote, had access to whoever it is that I am or whatever it is that I'm doing, that in their time, if necessary, they will come back around, and they'll have their moment. But I'm not worried about coming to the end of the things that I have to say or to contribute as an author. And so I never was. I was always believing like I got 10 books on the top of my head right now. I don't know which one to write first, right? And given the space, I'm grateful that I don't have to say any meaning, mighty mo. I don't want to speak of that from a place of privilege. I really want to say that I really did, from this awful poetry book, grow in my craft and gave myself the space and the permission to, continue becoming a better writer.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey, because I think like this should be the inspiration dose that any aspiring author needs to just do the thing. And I'm excited to read your future works, and of the many 10 books you have at the top of your head, whichever ones come into existence, hopefully all of them. But EbonyJanice, thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a wonderful conversation. I have one final question for you, which is now about me, not you.
Okay.
I also have something to share, which is through the form of this podcast. This podcast is something that I'm obsessed with, and just spending a lot of time trying to grow it. And I don't have a huge online audience, but I have a big mission, a crazy goal, one day hoping to be on Times Square or something very delusional.
Yes.
So my question is, do you have any advice on what I should be doing to grow this show and spread the mission?
1,000 trillion%. If you don't talk about your podcast every single day, then you're doing yourself a disservice. And so I'm honestly, I don't want to promote this from a hustle grind perspective, but I used to say to myself, I am the CEO and the janitor of this corporation. If I don't come to work today, who is going to do it? And so I created, thankfully, systems where the newsletter went out on X day, the social media posts, the conversations that I had verbally, right? That every single day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I was telling people how to work with me, who it is that I am, what it is that I do. And eventually it really did. It's like consistency. Motivation is not going to be the thing that supports you, because some days you'll wake up and you won't be motivated. But discipline to where it is that you're headed is the thing that will do it. So every single day, tell people who you are, what this podcast is, what it's about. Even when you feel like you're screaming into the void. Because there is a season of my life where my Aunt Viola and my mom and my cousin Emiko were the only people that were liking whatever it is that I was talking about. And I'm talking full blown productions that I was putting on. And it was 3.5 people there and my dog. And now I'm not saying there's billions or millions of people, but I actually was on a billboard in Times Square just last year for my book.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah, yeah.
my
So
God.
to go from honestly, no joke, 3 people owning the book probably, to my book, in up here on this huge space, in Times Square in New York City, which isn't the pinnacle of the work, but you gave the example of Times Square in the future, and I'm just saying, literally telling people every single day, this is who I am, this is what I do. And I just believed that it mattered, and that at some point it would matter to other people. So here we are.
That that is amazing. Thank you. What a beautiful closing note. Even if feels like you're screaming into the void, keep screaming into the void. I think a lot of people can
Please.
take that message for
Uh-huh.
whatever work they're working on too. EbonyJanice, thank you so much for your time. This
Thank you
conversation
for
was
having me.
fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
This was My Rejection Story, hosted by me, Alice Draper.